Is that,
It's not from me, that's from them.
that's from them? And you have control of the presentation?
I do.
So do you want to stop sharing your screen right now?
I guess you want me to?
Probably.
Okay.
And then, Joe, is this the box on the top left? Are we good?
All right.
We recording? Okay. Thanks, everyone. We are a little delayed, so sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties that we had to work through. Welcome to a community meeting on the draft climate action plan. This is really exciting night for those of us who've been working on this plan for the past year or so. I'm Neil Duffy. I'm the current chair of the Select Board and also a member of the Climate Action Plan Committee. I'm here to kick things off and hand it over to my fearless leaders on the Climate Action Plan Committee. I will try to be brief, especially since we are delayed. The only things that I'll mention that I wanted to mention is that I want folks who are listening to this plan and watching this recording, hopefully afterwards, to just think about the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the UN body responsible for assessing the science of climate change and the impacts that it will have on our world. They provide annual assessment reports in which in past reports, they have recommended that the world do its best to try to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the science behind those reports is what really the basis for international agreements like the Paris Climate Agreement, as well as state legislation in Massachusetts, the state's Clean Energy and Climate Action Plan are really based on that science and that recommendation. The most recent IPCC assessment is a bit sobering because they actually think the chances of us staying below that 1.5 degrees Celsius global temperature rise it's pretty low. So just in terms of just coming out with the bad news first, we are in a very urgent situation as a town, as a country, as a planet, and so the time to act was many years ago, but we still need to act as quickly and as with purposeful urgency as we can. So I just wanted to make that remark. And then the flip side of that, I will say, as you're listening to this plan, is that, and I guess I would call this maybe the good news in thinking about this, is that there have never been more resources in the way of funding or technical assistance when it comes to doing something about climate change, both from the federal government and from our state government. And so Swampscott, not only do we need to be taking responsibility as stewards of the planet and of the natural resources in our own town, but we actually need to, it would be irresponsible for us not to take advantage of these opportunities. And this climate action plan is certainly a part of that. A lot of the specific opportunities that are coming out of the federal government and state government, having a plan in place will be or is a requirement to take advantage of some of these opportunities. So I want people to keep that in mind as well, that practically speaking, it's really important for us to have something like this in place going forward. And with that, I think I'm handing it over to the chair of the Climate Action Plan Committee, Martha Schmidt.
Thank you, Neil. So background, I guess we should project the slides if you can. Back in 2021, a Renewable Energy Committee completed a greenhouse gas inventory. Results were presented to the Select Board in October of 2021 with a recommendation that we form a coalition to work on a climate action plan. So, sorry. Our coalition started meeting in January of 2022, and a resolution to create a plan was put before the town meeting last May in 2022, and it was approved unanimously. So we did apply for a grant after that to work on a climate action plan with some assistance. So we did get that grant. It was $50,000, and we used that money to hire a consultant to help us with the plan. And the reason we needed a consultant is we needed somebody with broader experience who's done plans before, who could put together a more professional plan with graphics, which we as volunteers really didn't have that experience. So we now, with the help of the consultant, we have a draft plan that we've put before you, and it's really tailored to our town. So it took our inputs, stakeholder inputs, and we believe that it's succinct. It's about a 15-page plan. It's not a 100-page plan, and it's readable, digestible. And we're hoping to have that reviewed and finalized in time for the town meeting.
That's me. We're good. Sorry. Go ahead,
Okay.
Martha.
So I think we can flip forward. Okay, we talked about the timeline. So I wanted to introduce the Climate Action Plan Committee. 10 of us been meeting for the last year on an accelerated schedule. So we have a very dedicated group of team members who've been meeting like twice a month. And it's just to show you how devoted the team members are and the sense of urgency that we feel to get something done. So I wanted to have everybody introduce themselves. My name is Martha Schmidt,
Doug Thompson.
Vice Chair.
Sam Snikowski.
Neil Duffy.
Diana Edos.
Sierra Munoz.
Lily Worthley.
Thank you. Great job. Everybody's done a phenomenal job, and it's we're at a really good point to move forward. Next. So last fall, we conducted a survey, and
is it ready? Wait, to just put it in my board. One second.
so whoever is
What happened? They don't know what they're doing.
See if you can mute her.
I muted her.
There we go.
Is it possible to show the slides on the big screen behind you, or should we move closer to that screen?
I think you should move closer to that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So we conducted a survey, and 85% of the respondents indicated they were either extremely concerned or somewhat concerned about climate change. So it shows that we do have some broad support for taking action. Next. So this slide shows how climate change impacts our town. So we've seen flooding events. We had a big nor'easter.
Could you try to speak a little louder, please?
Sure, sorry about that. So we did have flooding events. We had a nor'easter with, I know I live up from Fishies Beach, and that dock was almost completely submerged during that storm. The streets were flooded. And besides flooding, storms, we've had downed trees, property damage. So I think you've all experienced this to some degree in our town. Go next. And this shows how Swampscott contributes to climate change. So the primary sources of emissions in our town are due to buildings and energy and transportation. So roughly 60% of our emissions are is due to buildings, and roughly 35% due to transportation, and another couple of percent due to solid waste treatment, solid waste. Next. So the main ways that we can use to address climate change are to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, as well as adapt to the impacts of climate change. So our climate action plan is called Resilient Swampscott, and it provides a framework. It doesn't have like a lot of details, but it does have enough of a detail that we can act on to make our community stronger, healthier, and more resilient, while reducing our contribution to climate change. Next. So our plan is broken down into 5 key focus areas. The 5 areas are buildings and energy, solid waste, natural resources, resilience and vulnerability, and transportation. So for each focus area, we've identified goals, strategies, and actions that help us get us into a better place. For each focus area, this is what the plan looks like. So there's a vision statement for each focus area, that there's a set of what's included in each focus area. There's baseline data that we're using to make decisions about, what can make a difference in terms of reducing emissions. And then there's a set of metrics that we can use to track our progress over time. Next. So each focus area has a set of goals, strategies, and actions. Goals are what we want to accomplish, so it's basically a vision statement. Strategies are how we will accomplish the goal, and actions are specific tactics. So for buildings and energy, for example, there are 2 goals. So most of the focus areas have 1 or 2 goals at a maximum. You can flip it. So for the 2 goals for buildings and energy include a focus on local renewable energy supply, increasing our solar capacity, and fixing gas leaks. The other goal really speaks to transitioning our buildings to 0 emissions. Next. For transportation, we have 2 goals. So the first is to prioritize safety, promote walking, biking, public transportation, and carpooling. The other goal is to electrify vehicles. Next. For resilience and vulnerability, we have 2 goals. And the first one is to address our infrastructure and improve it to make it more resilient to climate impacts. The other goal is to prepare our community, so to improve our responsiveness, our emergency response, and to educate the community as well. Next. For natural resources area, we have 2 goals, and the first one is to preserve our natural resources in our public green spaces. The other goal is to focus on sustainable landscapes and infrastructure. Next. For solid waste and recycling, we have 1 goal, and the theme is to reduce our waste, to reuse as much as possible, to divert via composting, and to recycle as much as possible. Okay, and I'm going to hand it over to Doug.
So we're going to do a little tag team here because Martha actually needs to leave and go to the planning board that's also having a meeting now to talk about this as well. So I'm going to take
And I'll
over
be
now and the rest of the team, and then Martha will be back. So the next section here, we want to talk about the outreach and engagement that we've had over the past year and leading up to tonight.
Doug, can I ask one question about Martha's report before she leaves? Which is, where does the concern about our beaches, in which of your categories, does the beaches?
Yes, great, Anita, thank you. We're actually going to come back to all of these areas in more detail. In the second section, we wanted to give you the overall architecture of all of this, and then we're going to dive into some more detail. So that might be a great place. You'll see the beaches there.
Yeah, and a short answer is reflected in the resilience and vulnerability section.
So many of you that are online and here in the room probably see a lot of familiar faces that are engaged here. And folks have been involved in a lot of different planning efforts over the last 10 years, 10 years. This includes the Swampscott Master Plan, the Open Space and Rec Plan, the Harbor and Waterfront Plan, and the Coastal Climate Change Study that was done. So we've taken all of this information into consideration as we've moved forward with this plan. This listing here gives you a sense of the scope of people that have been involved, primarily people that are affiliated with the town. There, as Martha indicated earlier, there was a process that a consultant worked with us. We had 3 meetings with them, and all of these people were invited to those meetings. Many of these people participated in those meetings, so we got a wide variety and perspectives on all the different aspects that we need to be taken into consideration as we develop this plan. There are many other groups that we met with as well, other committees throughout town over the past 6 months. One of the things that the consultant did for us was help refresh a pathways analysis that looks at all the different sources of greenhouse gas emissions here in town. And you can see for 2020 where we're at in terms of the level of greenhouse gas emissions on the left, and what this pathway, what we're going to be proposing here, what are the options for actually bringing those greenhouse gas emissions down to the levels that are in line with the federal and state goals about getting to net zero by 2050. I think as Neil alluded to earlier, whether or not 2050 is even soon enough is a question mark, but yeah, that is the architecture right now for federal and state alignment. The bottom level question here is, can we even do even better? But there's a lot of work, as you'll see, to even get to this goal. So here, this breaks it down a little bit more in terms of the sources here and what's contributing. As we noted earlier, buildings are a major piece of greenhouse gas emissions here, and you see the trajectory in the blue that we hope Swampscott will embark upon over the next 25 years. Renewable energy is another piece in the gold. You see the impact that will have on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation, big opportunity in terms of the percentage decrease there, maybe even the biggest opportunity. And then waste, as we mentioned, as well. And sorry, I got something that's in the way on my screen. So now we're going to launch into the details by section, and other committee members are going to take different pieces. Diana's going to take our first piece on buildings and energy.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? So I'm Diana Eddowes. I'm part of the Renewable Energy Committee. And I don't know if Martha said this, but a lot of these sections will be implemented by the different committees in town. And so there's been a lot of input from the committees into these plans. And we're already doing some of this work, which is really exciting and helps us get to the goal. So right now, as Martha said, we did that inventory as part of the Renewable Energy Committee, which spurred this climate action plan, and you can see that we already talked that most of our carbon is from buildings, and most of that is from residential. So that's the place where we can have a lot of impact and we can reduce our emissions. And then we've already in town, as part of the Renewable Energy Committee over years, promoted things like solar, and that's gone up over time slowly. And so we just need to increase that and expand that. So next slide, please. And so this is a snapshot of our buildings and energy, sort of by the numbers, how we're going to measure success, the number of houses electrified, the number of solar installed, the number of enrollment in community power, which is sourcing renewable energy in New England, and as Martha mentioned, fixing gas leaks as well. And so this is where we can show you a little bit more about the detail of our two buildings and energy goals. So first up is reducing our emissions to supplied by 100% renewable energy, which is very ambitious, but as we've said, there's lots of incentives out there. We already are enrolled in the Community Power Program, which defaults to everyone getting their electricity by renewable sources. People can opt out, so we want to increase that to 100%. It's not at 100% now. And we want to also work with National Grid to reduce those leaking gas pipes. Doug, I think there's like little powwow things coming up.
Those came up earlier. I don't think,
Yeah.
I don't think they come up in this
okay.
section. Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, there are two. Yeah.
And then, maximize production of local renewable energy here in Swampscott. So that includes rooftop solar and potentially working on community solar, and then also battery storage, because that fits in with sort of the resiliency, being able to back up power when things go down, when there's lots of storms, which climate change will increase. And then also talking about getting our buildings more efficient. We already have a partnership with Revise Energy, which is part of the Mass Save program, which is working to do energy audits in residential buildings, provide the resources to be able to retrofit homes with better technology to reduce emissions. And so that's already in progress, and we just got another grant to help us with that in town. So that's really great. And then, ensuring development of new properties. I mean, we do have a lot of old properties in Swampscott that we have to tackle, but that anything new that's built is being built in the most sustainable way. So opting into some of the codes and the state standards that are already there. Next slide.
Still wants you to talk about HVAC.
Oh, I didn't talk about HVAC upgrades. Yeah, that's part of the Revise partnership, and that's what we're already tracking how many homes have done that and have upgraded to become electrified. Doesn't want to move on. The consultant has also helped us develop a pathway for solar. So we have sort of targets measured by in 10 years to get there, so we can keep track of this. And it's not just rooftop, but other areas where we can invest in solar, and that can by 2050, if we reach our goal, account for a lot of our current energy output. And similar for electrification, as I mentioned, we're already measuring this and wanting to increase the number of households that are electrified, and getting to those goals every year. We'll take partnerships, we'll take work, and we also want to emphasize buildings and not just homeowners, but renters, low-income community members, and try and make sure that we're not just building programs that are for the wealthiest in the community, but for everyone, and making it accessible. And there are a lot of incentive programs out there already through the state to prioritize that, and that's one of our grants that'll do that as well. Next slide. And similarly, with some of those upgrades, there's already a lot of technology, there's already a lot of programs. It will be easiest to electrify those forced hot water buildings and homes. It'll be less easier to do the others, but we can get there, and if we focus on that, and eventually we'll hopefully get to that 100%.
Okay, our next section is on transportation, and I'm going to take us through this. So what you see here is that there's a very, very small number of electric vehicles, pure electric vehicles this is measuring now, not hybrids. So back in 2014, there were a whopping 6 of them in Swampscott, and we're now up to 90. And you also see on this slide the kind of diversity from a national survey of the different commuting modes that people use here. And the vast majority of people are still using cars or trucks. and less than 20% transit and smaller percentages for other modes of transportation. And that's a major piece of our effort here, is to shift the modes of transportation that people use. So in a similar format, and on the left you see kind of the similar numbers that we had on the previous slide, but the major things that we're going to be looking to focus on here are, one, getting people out of cars and into anything else, whether it's walking, biking, public transit, and that's a major first piece of this. And the other piece is that people are still going to need to have cars for various reasons, and we need to make sure people are aware of all the opportunities to leverage federal and state tax incentives to move towards electric vehicles when that's appropriate and possible. So first off here, very intentionally, we mention bike paths as a reasonable alternative. I got some support here in the audience for that. Way of getting around. And, Swampscott's made some moves in this direction, but there are a lot more opportunities for making, Humphrey Street, Paradise, a lot of the major roads here much more bike friendly. There are carpool opportunities out there, shuttle services. It may be very difficult to figure out and access. That's something that we believe many people talk about. If I could only get a reasonable way to get to the Blue Line or the commuter rail. So we need to kind of help facilitate people getting from one end of town to those other access points.
Or have the bus go up all the way to Boston like it used to.
Okay, or the bus. We don't quite control the MBTA, but that advocating for those types of things is definitely what we need to be thinking about, absolutely. While we're expanding these pathways, we need to be thinking about safety. The last thing we need, obviously, is for, start encouraging this and then it not really be a safe mode of transportation. We do have congested areas here that we need to be thoughtful on how we develop this. EV adoption is going to be a big piece of this. As I mentioned, public awareness campaigns. I think a lot of people still think that, all electric vehicles are way out of my price range. And now there are more and more options at all different price ranges, especially if you can navigate the federal and state incentives. But that takes work and it's complicated, and we need to help people make that easy. And a key piece of this as well is charging stations. I know a lot of people will say, hey, I'm interested, but there's no way I'm getting stranded. A gas station's still a lot easier to find than a charging station. So we've got a couple charging stations here, a couple at Town Hall. They're frankly creaky slow. We need much more fast, many more high-speed charging stations so people feel like they're got real options. These next couple slides, like in the buildings and energy, take us through kind of what the pathway needs to be to moving people to more and more electrification when they do have vehicles. And these are, like buildings and energy, very significant goals. But this, unfortunately, is what it's going to take to actually achieve these 2050 targets that we have. You see here in terms of the increase in transit riders, getting to 20% in 2030. Remember, it was like 16% now. So that's relatively achievable. But then another big jump by 2040 and a major jump by 2050. And you see the number of people that translates into about 400 in 2030, all the way to 2,000 people here in Swampscott using public transit instead of their own vehicles. So now I'm going to hand it off to Lily to talk about resilience and vulnerability.
Yes, so resilience and vulnerability. So a lot of what we're talking about is what are we going to do to reduce carbon, reduce our impact of contributing to climate change. So this is about what are we going to do to protect our people and our infrastructure within Swampscott from the threats of climate change. So just some quick numbers for you. We're expected to have 21 days above 90 degrees by 2050. So think of a whole month of just hot. And then 52 days by 2090. And then to the right, there are some images from the recent Christmas Eve storm where whole parts of town were flooded, extensive damage done along the waterfront. We're all familiar with what this feels like, what this experience is, and it's only going to be more frequent and more extreme as climate change unfolds. Next slide. So again, some numbers for you. Over a quarter of Swampscott housing is faces moderate risk of flood. So that's 1,071. 7 out of our 15 social facilities, so schools and government buildings, libraries, are also facing major flood risk. And then by over the next 30 years, 128.6% increase in the number of days over 90 degrees projected. So that's more than double. So the metrics that we're looking at are number of properties facing flood risk, social facilities facing flood risk, and then heat-related emergency room visits. That's how we're going to be tracking our progress on these. And so what it really comes down to with these two goals, one is to design and maintain infrastructure that is resilient to climate impacts, and then improving community preparedness for climate impacts, making sure that when storms come, when events happen, folks are able to get to safety, know how to get to safety, and folks know where the most vulnerable members of our community might need an extra assistant, extra helping hand to make sure that they are safe. Next slide, please. So here are the goals and strategies for our resilience and vulnerability. So again, it's broken into two goals. So infrastructure and services are resilient to climate impacts. That's protecting municipal assets. You know, what infrastructure and buildings is located in the basement where it's very prone to flooding? Could that be moved to other areas in the building? Water, sewer infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, making sure that the various ways that we keep town running are able to be kept running throughout these changing dynamics of climate change. Anticipated sea level rise in extreme weather events. So increasing the flood area overlay by adopting some areas that are outside of the FEMA 100-year floodplain boundary. Based upon local data, we know that the 100-year floodplain boundary is not fully encompassing all the areas in town that are at risk of flooding. So we want to make sure that that is updated with that. And then also with that information, update the hazard mitigation plan. So how are we going to respond? And then the community members have resources, information to better prepare for climate change and its accompanying health impacts. This is taking care of our people, taking care of the folks who are in Swampscott who need additional assistance, making sure that they're being safe, making sure that emergency responders and all of those folks know which areas might need more attention than others, and making sure everyone's prepared and has information ready to go, both from the response side on emergency departments, but also on the resident side, so folks feel prepared and they know what's coming, so they can be safe. And I will pass it over to Sierra to talk about natural resources.
Thank you. Great. So I'm Sierra Munoz. I am on both the Swampscott Conservancy and on the Open Space and Recreation Plan Town Committee, and have been building all of these areas, but I'm going to speak specifically to the natural resource area. So just a few metrics on the slide in front of you to create kind of a baseline for our efforts on this front. 78% of residents are within a 10-minute walk to a park, which is wonderful. We have lost 69 acres of tree canopy in the decade 2010 to 2020. I think there was some updated information on this recently as well. And then some information about our water consumption. And then as additional context for this, we are really buoyed in this area by a strong townwide commitment already to conservation and green space as a natural resource. So we have a strong open space and recreation plan as a town. We have the support and efforts by the Conservancy, and several of the goals that I'm going to reference are already referenced in some way in the Swampscott Master Plan. So that's a great baseline to have as we're looking at these goals. So just a little more context here. This is kind of giving our overview of the goal being providing equitable access and protection to open spaces, tree cover, habitat, and water resources through smart management practice and resilient infrastructure and public education and encouragement. So you can go to the next. So just to speak through the two goals here in the natural resources area, and then I'll quickly highlight some of the sub-areas. For this first one, Goal 1, Swampscott's natural resources work to enhance community resilience. So this first one, this public green space goal is both critical for mitigation of impacts of climate change locally, and it's also supported, this one, by our existing initiatives. The Swampscott Master Plan references this green space network that this is referring to already. So you can hit next. Sorry. Yeah, that's fine. That's all right. And then another big piece of this goal is the really thoughtful consideration and advanced planning to support open and conservation space. Next. And then it's really important that these green space conversations consider neighborhoods in all 6 of the precincts of Swampscott and for all residents to prioritize equity in this and all of the goal areas. So the second major goal here is infrastructure and landscapes support a healthy and diverse local ecosystem. And so this can be, next. Oh, I skipped trees. Didn't mean to skip trees. But this is, going back up there really quickly, but an important piece of Goal 1 is the thoughtful and rapid replacement of trees that are removed or lost. So skipping back down to Goal 2, so this can be the infrastructure and landscape supporting a healthy and diverse ecosystem. This can be from a couple of different lenses, and we've kind of outlined them here. This can be on municipal level, securing funding to install green infrastructure on public properties, considering zoning code updates to require, zero net loss of green space, but then it also can be on the community engagement and education side by launching education campaigns to promote regenerative landscape practices among residents and businesses and town-wide. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sam.
So I'm Sam Snikovsky. I'm a student at Swampscott High School. I'm our student vice president, and I'm also a president of our environmental club. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about solid waste and recycling. So up on the screen, we have 3 statistics. The first one talks about the amount of residential waste that's diverted from households by recycling, which is just 28%, which is a lot lower than a lot of people might guess about Swampscott. Also, 19% of our households aren't even served by municipal recycling, which is another really big area for us to focus on to be able to make all those programs equitable and accessible. And lastly, just as more of a general overview, we have over 4,500 tons of residential waste that we're generating. So just to talk a bit more generally on the statistics we're working with in Swampscott, only 28% of our waste is actually diverted, and the other 72% it goes to trash, which isn't even landfills. It'll often get incinerated, which can be even worse. So on the right, you can see our metrics for solid waste reduction, and you can see all of our baselines, which is 28% by 2018. So obviously we already passed 2018, and even now we have a lot of really big metrics ahead of us, like reducing it by 30% within just 7 years, and other things. And then on household generation, as you see, our baseline is 0.7 tons, and we want to be able to reduce that to 0.45, which is almost in half, by 2050. And then moving on to our goals. So first we're going to talk about our reuse program, which is going to talk about the way that we can use local town areas to encourage recycling or exchanging, so basically reusing, be that through programs in the library or various events for seniors and other low-income residents within Swampscott. Second, to talk about our zero waste target for town offices, buildings, and schools, which we're going to get more to on 1.2 as we talk about mandating a program there, which relates to composting. So we would also like to mandate composting in all municipal buildings in Swampscott, and also launch a town-wide outreach program to make sure that both residences and businesses can also participate in the composting program. And lastly, we're going to make sure that our commercial buildings are also focusing on waste diversion. Oftentimes, especially with restaurants, there can be, and grocery stores, there can be a lot of food waste produced from that, and it's really important for us to focus on it. And I'd also just like to note, I know we talked about how realistic it is maybe to reach some of our benchmarks and goals as we approach 2050. Solid waste is definitely one of the easier ones to accomplish.
Terrific. So we've reached the end of our kind of prepared presentation, and some of you were able to get a couple questions in as we went along, but this is a time where we encourage those of you at home and here in the audience to ask away, and we'll do our best to be responsive. We want to get your input and feedback.
One thing just to add is if you're in the audience and you have a question, just try to make sure you have a microphone. I can bring one over. I think there are some in front of different people. There's one over there. There's one back over there. But just so people on Zoom and on the recording can hear what your question is.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. I really appreciate it. I'm a member of town meeting, and we are going to get to vote on this, and so I want to know if we are going to get a copy of this report before town meeting so that we can study it.
Fantastic segue, Anita. Thank you so much. Actually, takes me to this next slide. So the process here was that there was an article passed last year at town meeting indicating support for developing this plan. We've been developing this plan, and then we hope to bring back this plan to town meeting next month, and for it to be voted on and supported at that point in time. Now, you can tell there's a lot in here. Not every single thing probably is 100% comprehensive. Things will, change around, but the general thrust of addressing climate change in a comprehensive way, the way we've laid it out here, is what we've been looking for town meeting to be supportive of.
And I'd also add that the draft plan is online right now. If you go to the Swampscott Climate Action Planning Committee website on the government website or the town website, the draft plan is available, and then the 13th is when we're going to have, or on the 19th, excuse me, is when we're going to have the finalized plan available. We can review everything that we've gone over today on the draft slides.
And that will go out to all town meeting members in advance of town meeting.
And the warrant. That's the plan. The warrant, the last day for the warrant to be finalized is the 24th. And so the plan right now is to have this finalized before that date, so it can be included in the warrant. We'll try to make sure if that doesn't happen, that's happened before, as you know, as a town meeting member, then we'll make sure we can send communications out to town meeting members so they can find the plan elsewhere.
Thank you.
The other thing in here, as you've probably been able to see already as we've been talking, is that we're going to be continuing to engage with a lot of the committees around town. This forum was meant to make sure that there was a very open way that people could communicate and find out what's going on and provide further input. But we'll be continuing to do that with committees that are devoted to these issues over the next couple weeks as well.
So I have a question. This is Alan Van Arsdale. The question is, how confident are you with regards to the information that you have, that you're going to be presenting, that will be anointed by the town?
Did you say that? Did you say how confident are we that it will be adopted by the town?
Confident in the information.
No, how confident are you that you have all the information that you need and the actions that you're presenting that will be appropriate for the town to vote on it?
I mean, I can give one answer to that, Ellen, and others can chime in as well, which is that, I mean, this is a rapidly developing field, right? both the science is rapidly developing in terms of whether or not it should be 2050 or 2040, even in that macro sense, things are, all the different technologies are developing rapidly. I believe that we've covered kind of the general framework and areas that are going to be critical to actually getting to a 2050 net zero goal. And we've laid out some very reasonable goals, strategies, and actions to get there. But it's very, very possible, I think we would all agree, that even by next year, there may be some strategy or action that needs to change based on evolving circumstances. But this gives us a beginning plan to start moving in the right direction. Others want to?
Yeah, I think I agree generally with what Doug said there. I think that this plan, and we probably should have mentioned at the beginning, this plan, like most master plans, is a framework. It's a roadmap to get to a goal. When your goal ends in 2050, it's obviously not going to be all-inclusive or hitting every detail, but it's meant to hit the large topic areas. And this goes to, there's another question online in the chat about, is this work being discussed in other neighboring towns? So I would say that there are a lot of neighboring towns and other cities and towns in the state who have similar plans with similar goals. So these goals and actions align with plans that have been developed by, to name some, there's Salem and Beverly have a regional plan that they put together. The same consultants that worked with us worked with them. New Bedford, I think, was one that the same consultants worked with them. Somerville, Cambridge, Winchester, Natick, Arlington, Newton, Brookline. So multiple communities across the state have very similar plans that, generally speaking, have similar goals and actions and topic areas, but also have some that may be tailored to their locality. And I would just ask people on Zoom if you could either raise your hand or ask the question in the chat, just so we can coordinate with the folks in the room. It looks like Aaron Burdoff, you have a question. If you can grab a mic.
Let me go first.
Yeah, first, yeah.
Oh, okay. Or Jim first.
Let's see. Is this working? Can you?
Yeah.
It is. I think you guys have done a terrific job. Thank you for all your efforts. While you have the big picture, but several times you've alluded to things that are in progress now, the inspection of buildings, grants available for electric vehicles and things like that. Is one of your goals also to make that type of information more available for people to take action now? My experience is that it's very difficult as just a general person to really hone in on where all this information is, where these programs are located, how to reach them. And I think that would be a terrific service that the committee could provide in the interim to just move that along. My home, I know, has got serious problems with weatherizing and things of that nature, and yet I really don't know where to turn for that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the cheapest and easiest thing that we need to focus on, across the board. And I think Diana mentioned it. We've actually collaborated with Revise and gotten a grant for the town that's going to be actually hired an energy advocate that'll be going around to every single house in town and helping people understand how to access the weatherization through Mass Save or converting to a heat pump or, other options as well. So we need to kind of keep building on that.
Yeah, that proactive stuff, I guess, is what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Aaron Burdoff, Juniper Road. Again, I think I want to echo the sentiments that I think this report is very well done, and I think there's a lot in it that will create an excellent framework for us. So I want to commend every one of you on that. So thank you for doing that work and putting all that time in, because I know this does take time. My question is about the execution of this plan. We have lots of plans in Swampscott. take, for example, the housing production plan, that never actually meets its goals from plan to plan. So have you had conversations as a committee as to what mechanisms you can use to better reach goals than just have plans?
Yes. We have had those conversations. I mean, I would say that the step that doesn't cost anything but more time by volunteers is that, you know, we've had conversations about what happens with this committee, this group, after this plan is adopted or endorsed, or however, whatever you want to say about that. So I think some of that is that perhaps this committee becomes the committee like the Open Space and Rec Plan Committee to sort of oversee the implementation, even though the specific implementation may be happening by a department at the town or by another committee, but just making sure that those things are happening. I would say, this is my personal opinion, is that if the town wants to be serious about this, then we need to hire staff to do it and manage it, because it's not something that you certainly can't volunteer your way out of reaching net zero emissions. It just won't work. But that's not going to happen in the next couple of months.
I personally second that motion, but anyway.
Yeah, but it's a great question and something we talked a lot about.
Hi, I'm Colleen. I'm just going to ask a follow-up question about natural resources, if I may. So again, I just want to echo the sentiment in the room and thank everybody for their time and energy dedicated to the plan. I'm just kind of curious, when I look at the draft plan, in those, actionable goals, I do see some items that talk about increasing natural assets, but in the overall description of the goal, unlike the other goals under building, transportation, solid waste, et cetera, it simply says providing equitable access to and protection of Swampscott's natural resources through smart management practices and resilient infrastructures. I think it would be great if the goal could actually reflect those standards and actually increase those natural assets and resources. It would also be wonderful to see if there might be some mechanisms, maybe at the state level, to do things like we do with green energy and enticing residential homeowners to not just be educated about some of the changes that they can make, but that we could actually have some conversion, perhaps, of our greatest crop in Swampscott away from lawns into resources that will actually serve to meet some of these standards. So I think that kind of twist might help. And then I would also just echo that diversity is great, but we need to ensure that diversity, when we're talking about our natural resources, reflects biodiversity that will create resilient climate resources. And I know there's still some, disagreement, say, with how we manage our tree canopy and what species we prioritize there because of access to those. But I think if we can create demand for those native species and those near natives, those that are going to do well for climate resiliency, such that they're reinforcing biodiversity and the benefits that we'll get from biodiversity, that would be another kind of great complement. So there was a sort of question in there, but more of a comment, like I hope the goal can actually reflect some of the things that you're putting forth in those actionable items. Because the way the goal is written right now, it seems to reflect more of like, let's just keep what we have versus no, let's get aggressive about this and actually make a change to increase things. And then I do have a second question. When we calculated, or when the consultant, I don't know who calculated the carbon kind of signature or footprint of the town, was any accounting done to consider how we manage our money and who we bank with in terms of calculating our carbon footprint?
Excellent point. No.
I don't believe so.
That might be another way that we might actually have a significant impact.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Colleen.
Yeah, that's very, very thoughtful comments. Thank you.
Questions in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, my name is Mark Barden. I have two questions. One is, we have a carbon footprint that I assume the consultant came up with and said, hey, we're here. Will there be periodic readings by that consultant, by that same consultant, so that we know that we're on the right track? You know, that we're here and we're down to here, and
Yes.
there will be.
Not necessarily by that consultant, but that data is actually publicly available through the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And that's where we got the baseline data from. It lags several years, but that data does get refreshed on a regular basis. So we'll be able to track what our impact is over time.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And
Can
I guess,
just add to that
Go ahead,
quickly?
Neil.
Just, so Martha, who's, I wish she was here, but she actually played a huge role in creating that emissions baseline using, as Doug mentioned, MAPC's tools, and the consultant actually just worked with the baseline that she created and helped to, make sure it was ensure its accuracy. I think that what I like about this plan and the other plans that other municipalities have is that it's not just based on emissions reductions, but on metrics like electrifying homes, number of homes electrified in the energy sector anyways, number of homes electrified or number of EVs in town, so that you actually can start counting those things, which is a little bit easier to count, and you're not necessarily spending a lot of time on your emissions inventory, which is also a large task in and of itself. And as Doug mentioned, I mean, it's a challenge because it is a lag. Like we're basing this off of 2017 when Martha developed this baseline, and that's because that was the most recent year that we could get sort of relatively reliable data for. So we couldn't just tell you right now, like, what was our greenhouse gas emissions last year as a town, in other words.
Right.
So it's good to have those metrics also. Sorry, and you had another question.
I did, and, so the town is building a significant building. I wonder, is the town putting their, equity into the building? Can we see, what kind of heating systems, what kind of air conditioning, what kind of landscaping the town is doing? Can we put our money where our mouth is?
We can. I mean, so that particular building, I can speak to the building, and Suzanne, you can speak to the landscaping. So the school itself, I assume that's the building you're talking about.
Yes.
It's all electric and geothermal with a high-performing building envelope. The projected energy use intensity for it, I think the last, if I remember correctly, is something like 25 kBTU per square foot. Just to give you some context, the buildings we have now are, the elementary schools are like, their EUI is anywhere between like 80 and 110. An average school building in Massachusetts is probably like an EUI of 65, so it'll be very efficient and all electric.
Well, I think that's good. I mean,
It's solar ready.
it kind of goes back to the previous answer that you gave for the previous question. If we took the data from like 2017, that had the old building existing.
Yeah, so I think that you're speaking of, it's a lot, although it's not easy, it's easier for us as a town if you're just talking about municipal operations and what the emissions are for us as a municipality, meaning like the schools, the police station, the fire station, the library. That's a little bit easier, but this plan is for the town.
Sure.
For the community. So municipal operations is like 1% or 2% of the total emissions. So it's tiny compared to what we as residents or businesses are.
Even tiny, I think it's good to show that the
Absolutely.
town is putting their money where their mouth is,
Yep.
and they're doing things.
I don't know if you want to speak to the landscape.
Agreed. I'm a fan of leading by example. And as part of this committee and the Swampscott Conservancy, I worked with the landscape architects for about a year working on the landscaping plan for the new school. It's a very, very programmed site in that we're fitting a lot into a very small space. But in working with members of the tree committee to identify very specifically what trees to save, what trees could go if they needed to go, and then landscaping with only native to Massachusetts plantings, making sure that there was space to teach elementary students about our native ecosystems and pollinators and how they interact with the plants that we are planting there. It was very, very, very deliberate, purposeful experience. There was a lot of back and forth, but we really landed on a space that I think puts so much of what's in this plan as an example for our school children and kind of what we want Swampscott to hopefully become.
Great.
And to that point, and to Aaron's question about, enforcement or sustainability of these goals after we put this out, several of us here and folks from the Renewable Energy Committee have been part of sustainability subcommittee discussions around the school building, and so that's and to try to keep the existing commitments, so open space commitments. And so I don't think we've agreed on anything, but I sort of have a vision of the continuation of this work, the committee's work, being, some of us or whoever's on that climate action plan committee moving forward, having a seat at those tables for the next building project, the next whatever it may be, to keep this voice and keep the goals that we're presenting here at the forefront of any future projects or considerations that we're making as a town. Good question. There were a couple questions in the chat. Let's see. And did we have any other? Oh, Anita, yeah. Go ahead. We'll go to Anita and then see if there's anything else in the chat.
I'll look it up.
Thank you. Ooh, Anita Farber Robertson. I don't think I ever identified myself. Oops. So I'm back to the transportation issue, and the transportation is clearly a big part of it. And it seems to me that unless we work out something that has to do with transportation that gets us outside of Swampscott. And first, I will beg your forbearance. I will tell you a story. When I moved to Swampscott 32 years ago, and someone said to me, "How do you like it here?" And I said, "It's lovely here. The only trouble is you can't get anywhere from here." And they actually looked at me and said, "Where would you want to go?" But I grew up in New York, so I like to go places. So to me, it's not realistic to think that we could make any plan to seriously mitigate the transportation issues if we don't work with the state, the feds, the North Shore region. Like I said, I used to just hop on the bus and go to Boston. It was great. It was easy. Every bus stop was like a couple blocks from every house. Very easy. And then they made you have to change in Wonderland. And that changed everything. So then I was driving my car to Wonderland. And then I'm already driving my car to Wonderland. Maybe I'll just drive all the way into Boston. It really, it changed how I related to Boston, but the commuter rail is too expensive. All these things about making the free transportation or high, we're just this little tiny town, but we're connected to all these other things. So how does this plan relate realistically to what we really have to push for political will all around? So I'm just wondering how you put that into the plan so that the plan isn't just pretend.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and other people obviously can chime in because we certainly had this discussion. I think maybe even in earlier drafts there was a piece about that kind of advocacy component. We've landed for the moment, we're still taking input on the fact that we don't control the commuter rail or the bus, MBTA, et cetera. That's certainly working with our, state and federal representatives. That would be something that would be important. But we kind of focused on the things that were much more within our control. There is a commuter rail, there is a blue line. Is there a way to get a shuttle there? Are there ways to increase the bike paths so people can get to commuter rail? Maybe the town needs to think about, are there ways to make the commuter rail more affordable for people on an income-based basis, for example? Those are things that are definitely much more within our own control. And so that's where we landed for the moment in terms of focus. Lily?
I would just add, totally hear what you're saying, yes. But also most car trips are taken like within, I don't forget the statistic, but it's like within like 5 miles of the home. Most trips you're taking in your car are bikeable if there were safe and easily accessible infrastructure to bike somewhere. I don't right now want to bike down Paradise Road to anywhere. That's terrifying, but I do because I'm stubborn. But that's where we can really focus on, and this plan is reducing that number of small trips. If we could get folks biking to the grocery store, if we can get folks biking to town hall, walking to town hall, having a free shuttle to town hall.
Walking to school.
Walking to school, exactly.
Walking,
we don't need
walking.
walking, biking. That is where my head is at in terms of transportation for this plan. But I bike in the winter. We can have our differences. But yeah, I just wanted to make that point, that the personal trips are really quite small and take up a large number of the emissions by personal vehicles. So that's where we want to target because we have control there, as Doug was saying.
Yeah, and not everyone's going to be able to walk or bike even a block, let alone a mile. So this is where kind of the shuttle, is there a shuttle literally that kind of goes around town and really makes it accessible for 50%, 80% of people to kind of do what they need to do within town with a shuttle, for example, that's a block or two from where they live. I'm not saying that's literally the solution, but there's the creative ways that we can control a lot of the actual short car trips.
Thank you.
And I can also say more on the side of schools and especially with students. I remember in middle school, if you wanted in the summer to go biking on the beach, like people's parents would drive them to the beach and then they would go biking there because parents would typically not want their children to bike from their home. I mean, Olmsted, you really wouldn't bike, but even if you go through Paradise and down another street, it's still not really safe. And then even to school, at the high school, I mean, there's a lot of people that choose to drive. I know people that live maybe half a mile away from the high school and they still drive to school every day. So I think there's also a lot of effort we can put in that doesn't have to do with the state or the federal government, where just at a town level we can really be reducing unnecessary car trips.
Saw a hand go up over there.
I'll try and just project so that the mic doesn't have to come back down. Hopefully this will work for those at home. So also in addition to kind of encouraging behavior changes in terms of biking places, have there been conversations about de-incentivizing things? Like, for example, the high school raffles off parking tickets, like as part of a PTA fundraiser, and kind of creating those types of culture changes. And then along with trash as well, it's great to kind of improve our recycling efforts, but also I saw, some tribute in the draft to encouraging less consumer behaviors, but we all know how well the new trash cans went over as one, but I like that as a mechanism to decrease consumption. Are we considering other things like perhaps downsizing our trash cans again, and those kinds of changes to encourage less consumption and greater compliance or interest. So I think, both transportation and trash have those opportunities, as does landscaping, de-incentivizing lawns and perhaps giving credits to homeowners who are willing to de-lawn and increase tree cover and those types of things as well.
Free rain barrels.
Yeah, I think I would. I would just say, without getting into any of the specific examples that you mentioned, I would say that I think there's broad agreement and general agreement that that the incentivizing is nice, but we are past the point of that being our only.
I agree. That's what
tool.
I'm saying. Like, I'm seeing
Yeah.
a lot of let's encourage people to walk and let's encourage
Yep.
people to bike, but I don't see as much let's figure out how to encourage people not to drive. I don't think those are saying the same things.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
I also think a part of encouraging is, as we talked about before, the third point there about improving safety, which I think we really can't be disencouraging people from driving if it's not safe to go biking. So I think this plan, because it accounts for safety, that is a way to discourage people from driving to places they could otherwise bike or walk.
It is a delicate balance, right?
No,
In terms of, you don't want to lead with a plan that's all about sticks as opposed to carrots, right?
Totally
And I think it's very urgent, and yet there are a lot of things we haven't done that are good carrots. And it seems like that's a reasonable place to start.
But I think I will say, and this will hopefully answer the question, I think it was from Carol, about what are you voting on? What is town meeting voting on? And so what I think is important to say about that is that, for one, the plan in its current state, town meeting, we're not required to have town meeting vote on this because there is no actual action that is happening other than adopting the plan. So it is, for all intents and purposes, there are no teeth. We've been saying a lot, there is nothing that is happening other than town meeting is saying, yes, we believe in this plan and this is the direction the town should go in. For me personally, as a member of the board that would be adopting it, which is the select board, which in other towns, it would be, the way it's worked in a lot of towns that I'm aware of is the select board would adopt the plan and you would report this plan to town meeting. Town meeting probably supports it and maybe supported it happening in a non-binding resolution. I think the reason I want to have this public vote personally, and I think we've talked about this as a group, is that it's important for town meeting to understand that although measures like that are not specifically outlined here, the implications of adopting and supporting a plan like this is the idea that those types of implementations will be coming in years to come, maybe next year, maybe 5 years from now, and that's what we're talking about here. So I think that it's important to be upfront about that and say that to folks. And so hopefully that answers Carol's question that, what you're voting on is this will be the final plan that should be hopefully ready by the 19th, and hopefully you'll have time to digest that, but there is no actual specific implication to voting for this. There is nothing would change other than that town meeting is supporting this plan.
Is there anything else online?
We pretty much covered it.
Where was it?
Any other questions here in the room? Are we good online, or?
Oh, good.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
You want to close it?
So,
This is being presented to the town, and then it's going to be approved, and then what happens?
As we mentioned earlier, that's still under discussion. I think that we'll be in consultation. We presented this to the select board last week. I think there was a great deal of support. I think then we come back to the select board after the town meeting vote and make sure it's clear that whether or not this committee should continue to be kind of the coordinator of these efforts going forward. That's probably the most likely, concrete next step. And then this committee would be working with all the other committees, as Neil said earlier, and Sierra said, to kind of coordinate efforts with, open space and rec, with renewable energy, with all sorts of other committees in town and stakeholders in town to start moving this plan forward.
And just as a reminder for folks, the draft plan, which again will be updated and a new one will be posted on the website, hopefully slightly after April 19th. But the draft plan is online right now. I've just put the link to the Climate Action Plan Committee town site in the chat there, and then. Folks, you can also just Google Swampscott. So you can find the draft plan there, but if you have feedback later in the next few days, you can share that. There's an email address on that site, on that town committee site. So please do feel free to reach out to us that way, ask any other questions that way.
And a couple of words about next steps. I know I was just at the planning board meeting and they said, well, what can we do? What are some of the actions that we should consider taking? And I think as we look at the plan, like some of the actions will be at the town level, some will be at the committee level. So we'll be identifying who is the primary owner of this action, who is a supporter of the action to kind of move it along. And then, how are we going to track it over time? So I think we, kind of move into the next phase of implementation.
I think.
There's one more question from Alan Von Arsdale. I don't know if it's, what additional intellectual assets do you need? I'm not sure.
I think, feedback.
Yeah.
So the feedback email is on our town committee website. And then also, this is going to be a living effort. It's, I'm on the Open Space and Recreation Plan Town Committee, and that was adopted years ago, but we meet every month. We review a certain number of the goals in that. We see what other town committees we can work with. We see what advocacy we could work with community groups. So what we need really is continued advocacy and engagement from all of Swampscott on these initiatives, because as we've discussed, this is just the framework and we're going to be implementing pieces of these goals for years, right? And when it comes to the next time we do need a municipal level stick or carrot, right? We need people to help socialize that and hearken back to this plan and what we presented here as to why do we need to do this. So yeah, I guess that's general, but it's my plea.
Great.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
I think that's it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank everybody online. We're closing up shop.
All right, let's just make sure.